Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome everyone to this special session of Funding Futures program. We decided to open it up to the general PCA network. But Funding Futures is our new training and grant program for 6 Hudson Valley Fellows. We've awarded them funding to run community listening campaigns in their towns to understand what people care about when it comes to their place in the local environment. And a huge part of that inspiration was Jason and another project that he's done. The process includes events, outreach, and a town-wide ballot, and a prioritization process to determine which projects in the community wants to see. And Vanessa and I also bring the cohort together in weekly guest speaker Zoom sessions and peer-to-peer learning in our office hours.
Yeah, and as Paige mentioned, for this session, we decided to open it up to more than just the cohort. And we're so glad to see others on the call. Thank you for joining us. At PCA, we believe that the overlapping ecological crises are best addressed by the communities that are closest to them by using approaches that honor the uniqueness of each place. And we're really interested in community or municipally owned solar as an important tool for providing clean electricity, saving residents money on their month-to-month electricity bills, but also as a potential tool for the communities to generate revenues that could be put back into other climate-friendly work. And Jason Angell, in fact, was one of the people that kind of turned us on to this idea. You may recognize Jason, who did a morning coffee event with us just recently, and he's an advisor to PCA. So we are pleased to have Jason here with us here today to discuss how this new project of his and Michael Rauch, who's also his partner here, how this new nonprofit Municipal Solar Partners works. Jason started this venture with Mike. Mike is a renewable energy project development professional with well over a decade of experience in renewable energy and public policy. Jason and his wife Jocelyn own and operate Long Haul Farm and the Ecological Citizens Project. And through Ecological Citizens Project, developed a community-owned solar project in Peekskill that maximizes community benefits and received the U.S. Department of Energy's Community Power Accelerator Prize. So Jason has firsthand knowledge of the operations and interests of municipalities, also as an elected official on the Phillipstown Town Board. So we're pleased to have both Michael and Jason with us today. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Thanks so much, Paige. And for those of you who are in the talk about Community Congress a few weeks ago, I hope you're not too sick of, of my face or voice, but I'm really glad that Partners for Climate Action made time for Mike and I to talk about Municipal Solar Partners today. And again, I'm just such a big fan of Partners for Climate Action and the essential role they're playing in stitching communities together that are doing the climate work on the ground. So I thought before Mike and I introduced ourselves and Municipal Solar Partners, even though there's many non faces on the screen right now, I wanted to do a quick kind of read the room with either hands, if we can do that, or hand emojis, if people have mastered that, but just to get a sense of the communities that are on the call right now. So the first question I just wanted to ask to see in the room, and I'm guessing I know the answer, but is your community a climate smart community? That's kind of a softball just to get us going. Hands if you are. Okay, all right. Seems like the majority, okay. All right, cool. And are you actively involved or do you sit on the board of your Climate Smart Community Task Force in your community? Okay. All right, still above half. Okay. All right, cool. More faces coming on to represent. Nice to see you. Does your community have a climate action plan currently on file? or are you in the process of developing one? Okay. All right. Some folks who are doing the dirty work of figuring out how to actually get there. Um, do you know if your climate action plan has renewable energy targets in it, specific targets to move your community towards more renewable energy? Okay.
I'm complaining about that because I've been trying to push for that.
Okay. Kate,
So,
keep pushing. Keep pushing, Kate. Okay. And then I think this is the last one. Just is your community host to a larger solar project? I just mean above residential scale. Have you ever had a commercial project proposed in your community? Does your municipality already implement solar? One. Michael. Okay. No. Steve, two. I think three. Jane is saying no. Jane, that's future work. Okay, cool. Thank you for doing that. So obviously, these all of you are folks that are kind of very civically involved, which is not surprising, giving funding futures. And it seems like about half of our communities still have work to do in kind of being specific about climate action targets or about kind of implementing solar on the ground in our communities. So thank you for doing that. Mike and I are just going to talk a little bit at first about what, I'll introduce our mission, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about how each of us got to Municipal Solar Partners and what we're trying to do together with it. But I would encourage, since it's a small group, Mike, if you're cool with it, if people have questions, as they come up, I think we're fine just taking questions as they go, so we can kind of stay current if people have questions, and we can have discussion, and we have until 2:30 if we need it. So I'll just quickly share my screen if I can. Let's see. Oh, and also while I'm doing that, I just noticed that AJ Braverman is also on the call, and he is also a team member of Municipal Solar Partners. So AJ, shout out to you and to Matt Brown, who completes the Municipal Solar Partners team. All right, can everybody see that screen? Did I do that? Well, okay. So just quickly, before we introduce ourselves, Mike and I and AJ and Matt Brown have formed Municipal Solar Partners. And what is unique about it is it's a nonprofit solar development firm that's designed specifically to partner with municipalities to build municipally owned solar. And we're focused on municipally owned solar for a number of reasons, which we're going to discuss, but primarily because we believe they can maximize the benefits to the local community versus the conventional development model. But without going further, I think it makes sense for both Mike and I to talk about. We've kind of worked on projects and been partners in different things for a while, but maybe we can just talk a little bit about how we each individually got to this idea of starting a nonprofit solar development firm focused on municipally owned. So Mike, do you mind if I pass it to you to kick off first, talk a little bit about why you are part of MSP?
You made me do it. So I don't know. No, I've been in renewable energy development for a little while, and I worked for a local firm called BQ Energy for a long while that focused on developing solar farms on brownfield and landfill sites. And what sort of occurred to me, I think the first big change in the market that I was working through was COVID, and then, sort of the shutdowns and change in supply and demand that sort of rapidly followed for energy, and change in market prices, and then sort of working through supply crunches for equipment, and then coming out of that phase and interest rate changes, and now sort of going through to, under the current administration, sort of removal of incentives for solar and wind and renewables in general. One of the things that sort of irked me about all that is kind of having something as important as the energy transition being subject to kind of market forces and whims like that. And so in sort of thinking back on my career and some of the experiences of developing solar farms where, you're on a municipally owned site, your permitting entity is a municipality, and a lot of times your power buyer is a municipality. It sort of occurred to me or struck me that, there's with a municipality already that involved in a solar project, it's probably not a big leap to figure out a way to help them own the project. And I think um, where sort of the rubber meets the road is in a couple areas, but namely sort of early development help. How do we sniff out if we have a viable site without spending a bunch of money we don't have? And then, if we do have a viable site, how do we sort of take on the responsibility and the effort of developing it? And so those are the two main areas that Municipal Solar Powers was formed to help with. We can get into the details of sort of the sector and sort of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to help. But I think that's the key theme. So there's certainly a massive role for the traditional sort of private developer model. But I think that there's also an opportunity to sort of bring home some of the benefits of these projects to local communities, and so they can sort of be proud of the projects that they're hosting.
Thanks, Mike. And for my part, I'll just say I am so glad that Mike got dragged into this project, as he said, although he's kind of also a brain thought leader on it. But, pulling someone over from the private solar development side that's had the amount of experience Mike has had into building a nonprofit solar development and to develop a project that's worthwhile, but hand over all the benefit to the municipality in terms of 100% ownership and the benefit of, well, where do the revenues from the solar go? I think it's a big step over. Always appreciated that he's a part of this effort. And then just my kind of background, how I think about getting to Municipal Solar Partners is Mike and I actually worked on a project as my wife Jocelyn and I were launching our nonprofit called the Ecological Citizens Project. And one of the first projects of the ECP and a local group was to push for community choice aggregation, or CCA. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, but it was a successful effort where individual municipalities could join the CCA, aggregate the demand of all of their households and businesses, and purchase electricity together as an aggregated block, like a Sam's Club type approach. And that effort was really an effort to gain enough aggregated power by joining communities together to demand renewable energy sources and try to get a better deal on them. And so CCA went on to become Mid-Hudson Valley Community Power that Jewel administers. CCAs, I think they have been a useful tool. They've been an innovative tool. But I think, learned a lesson that aggregating municipalities with each other really can have a lot of benefit in the market. And we apply that kind of theory as well in Municipal Solar Partners. But at the same time, CCA still leaves you very much at the whims of the market in terms of where electricity prices are and who's producing them. And I think that kind of focused me more on the idea of local communities building their own renewable energy assets that they own. And so from CCA, which we were kind of working on in 2016 and 2019, our nonprofit, the Ecological Citizens Project, got involved in working with the city of Peekskill, which is Lower Hudson Valley, Westchester County, to build community-owned solar, nonprofit-owned solar on city-owned land. That is what, it's been supported by NYSERDA. It won a Department of Energy Community Power Accelerator Prize. Thank goodness we got that money before it got clawed back. But really, that's just kind of opened my eyes to how important it is in terms of who owns the system and who is making the key decisions as a solar system project gets developed, in terms of where the benefits are going to flow in the community, whether or not natural resources are protected, and who benefits from that system. And so that is kind of, on my part, led to this, the creation of Municipal Solar Partners with Mike, AJ, and Matt Brown, to really focus on municipal ownership of solar. And while it's a national effort, we are really focused our first efforts in New York State, because that's where Mike and I both have relationships, and also in Maine. But that's kind of what led us here. And so the way we're going to do this presentation is Mike and I are just going to kind of trade back and forth, on, I'll be talking, but if Mike has anything to say, we'll chime in. But also feel free to ask questions at any time. So just to be clear, municipal ownership means that at the end of the day, it is the municipality that will own the solar system that is built. And like I said, they would be in all of the key decision-making roles. I think, unlike many experiences of communities in the Hudson Valley, where there is a large third-party developer proposing a system and structuring it, and the community responding, in this case, it would be the municipality leading the development of the system in partnership with MSP and owning it at the end. And that has a number of different benefits. Municipal owners don't have a for-profit motive, and so they are going to return the financial benefits from the project back to the local community. Municipalities, as we all know, who serve on town boards or village boards, already own key pieces of infrastructure. So it's not much of a leap to own a solar energy system or battery storage system. And then, as Mike and I will talk about, municipalities have real advantages when it comes to solar development that we think can be taken advantage of. Mike, is there anything you want to add to that around municipal ownership?
No, I think that's right. Let's get going.
Okay, cool. So this is where I think we will add some more. So we wanted to kind of take a moment to look at where we are right now, because when Paige, Vanessa, and I were talking about this presentation and the flow of community benefits in terms of revenues through solar development, it was a completely different period. It was a completely different landscape. It was before the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill. And so, as Mike mentioned, that has really, and then after I talk about this, I'll pass it over to you, Mike. But the Big Beautiful Bill did a few things that have really altered the solar development landscape in ways that we still have to kind of read and experience. But one of the largest things it did, like Mike mentioned, is it ended the primary solar subsidy by the federal government, which is called the investment tax credit. And that allowed developers of solar to receive a 30% tax credit on the full cost of a project. So it was a major subsidy to kind of push renewables forward. It was very effective. In cases with different, you could step up that 30% by agreeing to prevailing wage labor or focusing on energy going to low-income households, up to 50% of the project. So I think all of us have to understand that we're now operating in an environment where a 30% hole has been punched into financing a project. And that has massive ramifications. The only other thing I'll say before kind of passing to Mike to talk about other ramifications related to electricity demand and prices is the Big Beautiful Bill allows the ITC payments as currently put into law if a project commences construction before the end of 2025. And after 2027, the ITC sunsets completely. There are still rules coming out about, are they foreign what's the acronym? Foreign, uh, Mike. I
I
mean,
don't
I
remember
don't.
the acronym. I don't
Yeah,
remember
it's
the acronym.
basic restrictions on equipment that you buy, particularly from China, and which is going to drive up the cost of projects. But at the same time, they kept the subsidy tax provisions for battery storage and microgrids, which is important. But so that is kind of the shift in federal policy, which affects everything we're doing. But Mike, do you want to talk a little bit just about the other ramifications?
Yeah, this chart is fun. I mean, I sent it around a screen grab of it the other night, so I'm
Also,
glad to see it made in
Mike,
a presentation.
is this chart for New York State or USA or
Yeah, I
for
saw that comment in the chat. I think it's U.S. demand. It came from NextEra Energy, which is one of the bigger energy companies out there. They own a lot of generation, and they own a utility called Florida Power and Light. So I suspect that it's U.S. demand. We can follow up with the footnotes that seem to have gotten cut off here. But yeah, the idea of the chart is obviously there's a lot of demand coming down the pike. There's sort of challenges to how to meet that demand with generation, given sort of supply crunches and the difficulty of building new generators, whether it be gas or nuclear. Coal is not really part of the picture, just from an economic perspective, um, or renewables. And so, the argument here is we're sort of at the federal level trashing sort of the ability to bring renewables online quickly, even though they're one of the technologies that can come online quickly. So that's sort of the issue. So some of the expectation that we've sort of read about in kind of policy and market analysis is for an increase in prices as a result of that, um, increase in demand. And I think one of the things you're starting to see shake out in the market is kind of the idea of bring your own power. So large large planned new loads, sort of trying to come online or planning to come online with their own kind of generation behind the meter, if you will. So sort of inside the fence of the new facility, rather than relying on grid power to meet that new demand or meet that new load. And so sort of as you see, the Googles or the Amazons or the Facebooks of the world kind of map that out, it's kind of interesting to bring that down to the local level and think, well, municipalities could be kind of a good host of kind of behind the meter generation, and maybe sort of that same um, economic rationale or thought process um, could hold sort of remain valid or hold water at the local level if a municipality sort of says we have a load of XYZ kilowatt hours for the fire station or the water treatment plant or what have you. Maybe there's an opportunity to sort of self-supply to some extent with behind the meter solar, or maybe purchase from a local community solar farm and be sort of an anchor off taker, as is sometimes called. So we're starting to sort of see the signs of increased energy demand and a restriction in the ability, or at least a bottleneck in the ability to bring new generation online to meet that new demand. And that's really the point of the chart.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mike. And I think the only thing I would add is that, if you look at the right-hand side data around the estimated costs, it's just to point out how important and effective those subsidies were in driving down the cost of renewables. And then the second point I would make that Mike mentioned, when we look at the left-hand side of the chart and the electricity demand that Mike mentioned, I mean, looking at the scale of the demand for electricity, I mean, roughly a doubling of electricity demand by 2040.
Electric cars.
What's that? Lisa Marie, was that a question?
Oh, nope. Sorry. I'm talking to somebody here. I thought I was muted. I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem. I thought you were like, that's crazy. This electricity demand is crazy.
Well, of course it is. That too. But yeah.
So, and a lot of that electricity demand is being driven by AI, by cloud computing, by artificial intelligence, and by electrification, climate-related electrification efforts. But just to put that point in it that Mike said, with this increasing surge of demand and the sudden decreasing supply, given the removal of the federal subsidy and the estimates of how many, Mike, I think you said something looking at the data, like 90% of projects in queue of new energy are renewable related. Is that correct, roughly?
It's an absurd number like that. I don't want to be quoted with that number, but it's a big number, sort of in the, certainly more than 50%.
So if you look at that just combination and you're someone at the local level, whether you're an elected official or just somebody involved in local civic organization, all of the predictions are a huge surge in electricity prices. And just to say that ITC, which is an energy analyst firm, recently put out a report predicting a 15 to 40% increase in electricity prices nationwide by 2030, tied up to all of this. So I think we should all be learning the lesson that at a local level, if we have the ability to still put solar projects online that can stabilize local electricity prices, that is a big incentive for municipal leaders beyond the climate-related aspects to look at municipally owned solar. So if there's no questions, that was the geekiest data chart we're going to have. So I'm sorry if you love geeky data charts. It's all downhill from here. If you don't, we're pretty much past them. And I may try to pull Mike into this. This is just a quick point. I mean, this is just to look at, just to think about the ownership landscape of renewables in America. And it's primarily been driven by a private for-profit model. These are some of the largest owners and investors of renewables nationally. And I know Mike sometimes says, you can't bash the for-profit developers too hard because they were the ones that moved into the space and developed renewables very much more risky, much more costly. So, Mike, I'll let you, if you want to say anything there, because you're always pushing back on me for being like, oh, it's all about profits. But you were in that development space during this ramp up. So I don't know if you have anything to add, but.
Well, I pass.
So I think the only thing I would say here is that, this ownership landscape in terms of who owns renewables or who invests and provides capital to build renewables obviously is driven by a motive to maximize returns and profits, right? And just as an example, not that that's the only thing these groups are doing, right? Because they've been an important part of driving down the cost of renewables. But if you take Next Era Energy, for example, and you look at their returns on investment, taking 2 years, and returns on investment are just the amount of profit generated by your initial investment. In 2018, Next Era's return on investment was 13% of a return, or $8.2 billion. That was a high water mark. In 2024, it was 5 to 6% of a profit margin, $6.3 billion. But it's just to say that if you think about flipping the ownership model to municipal ownership, which is not focused on the highest private profit returns, you begin to see why you think that flipping that ownership model will redirect the flow of revenues and benefits into local communities more so, although it's now been complicated by changes in federal policy. So I'm going to move on, unless anybody has a question or thought there.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh,
Let
me see. I'll try to. Do you mind? Yeah.
It says, I have to leave early for a meeting, but thank you for the information. I'm curious whether the Build Back Better 100% tax deductibility in year one for equipment investment may help offset the subsidy loss. I'm going to say we're not tax advisors, but and I'm not familiar with 100% tax deductibility for year one for equipment investment. Are you
What this
familiar?
might be speaking to is sort of the there's a depreciation benefit that was on
Yeah.
solar and wind and other types of energy generation. And solar, and I think it's been a while since I did a wind farm, but solar was able to sort of accelerate some of the depreciation to the upfront years. And the one big beautiful bill, I understand, changed the schedule with which you could take depreciation on it, but I believe that it also excluded renewables. That I think so. I think that that changed in the bill excluded renewable energy.
Oh, God.
Thanks, Mike.
I had a
Um,
really quick question. Who,
Yep.
when you building these farms, who maintains them?
So good question, and we'll definitely, Kate, talk about it more. But usually, I mean, it could be if the municipality wanted to, they could do so. But as most larger scale solar development projects, it's a contract with a third party to do operations and maintenance of the solar farm, and that's probably what Mike and I would recommend to a municipality, so it doesn't feel like an additional burden on them just to build it into the project cost.
Okay, but you don't have like partners that you're working with already.
No, no. Because we want to, I mean, part of our effort is to stay kind of, we'll talk about it, but if Municipal Solar Partners was going to develop a project for a municipality, we'd have to go through a public procurement process. And so we kind of want to come into that kind of clean, not having chosen partners or, but good question, Kate. So let's move on. Let's move on past some of the complex, depressing stuff that's happening at the federal level and in energy markets, and now let's get into the weeds of what we have control over at the local level and what the opportunity is. Because I know that's what all of you folks are probably more focused on, and that's why I think these groups are so important. So the big question Mike, MSP, and I are asking after the federal changes is, what type of solar can succeed in a post-subsidy environment? That's a really important question. And we really believe that municipally owned systems actually have the best chances to succeed in a post-subsidy environment. And I would caution that it's a new environment. So we don't know that to be true, but we have assumptions that it's true that we're testing right now with municipalities. And so the reason we think a municipality has advantages, particularly in a post-subsidy environment, is because they have access to underutilized land. And that's something that any keyed-in community member can track themselves. What municipal lands look like they could be good for solar development. Scenic Hudson has a great tool. I don't know if you all know it, How to Solar, which allows community members to look at different properties, especially municipally owned, that could be good solar sites. And I'd encourage you to do that and then come talk to us. Municipalities have full control of the permitting process. Right. So because it's on municipal land and because that local permitting is guided by the municipality, we believe and we have experienced that a municipality can shorten that permitting process time. And that is a cost saving, which gives that an advantage. Municipalities have access to cheaper forms of project debt. We'll talk about when we talk in a few moments about case studies in New York, but that could be access to bond financing. Which is an advantage. And then we'll talk about how MSP, one part of our strategy is to put together cohorts of municipalities, aggregated. So those projects aggregated can all get or by buying solar panels together. And then another important advantage is that municipalities will still build projects that have lower rates of return. Even if a project, dips below and is making less of a rate of return than private developers usually want to develop a project for, a municipality can still go forward if it's able to be built. And then municipalities have climate action plans that often have renewable energy targets in them, which are useful tools to help push the municipality forward. And like Mike said, they can build behind the meter, leading to savings. So if there's nothing to add there, we'll go on. And this is just a little bit to talk about the opportunity here. This is just a map of all of the climate smart communities in New York State, nearly 500 of them. And so I think while Mike mentioned, we're not saying that municipally we're going to solve climate change by building municipally owned everything. You know, there is still the significant and majority role for private development, but we think it's a really unexamined opportunity. And there's 500 climate smart communities in New York State that have identified themselves as wanting to take local action on things like renewable energy that are good targets to pursue and explore municipal ownership. And so in a second, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike before we get into kind of some case studies and real life examples. So I'm going to name the three approaches, Mike, and then kind of turn them over to you to talk about a little bit. But so based on Mike and I's experience, there's three different approaches, and I give Mike a lot of credit for really brainchilding many of the arms here. But three approaches to push municipally owned solar forward at different timeframes. One is to explore executing municipal solar contract purchase options, which we'll talk about in a second. That's something that can be done very quickly in the short term. The second is to look at stalled projects, and the third is to support new solar projects. And so, Mike, why don't I pause there and kind of let you go into a little bit more detail about the difference of those approaches.
Yeah, there's also just real quick a question in the chat about what behind the meter means, and I think that's an important point. So, if you're a generator, or a developer, one of your tasks is to find a purchaser of the power that'll come from your project. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, whether in the wholesale side of the grid or kind of the retail side of the grid. I think in the projects we're talking about here, we're really talking about, up to 5 megawatts solar farm. And that's sort of on the retail side of the grid. And what we mean by that behind the meter is there's a direct load adjacent to or on the same site of the generator. And so instead of selling power externally, and accounting for it through billing, really what you're doing is reducing the number of kilowatt hours that load pulls from the grid. So a great example would be like rooftop panels on the highway garage or on town hall. You're behind the meter because you're not a standalone generator dumping power into the grid. You are supplying power on site effectively and reducing the number of kilowatt hours that load on site has to pull from the grid. That tends to be a pretty valuable way to do a project, just because of sort of the value of, how sort of accounting for the value of kilowatt hours produced versus used, delivered, and supplied, and things like that tends to work. So maybe I'll pause there and watch the chat for any follow-up questions on that. But as far as the three approaches, yeah, I mean, we want to be a nonprofit development firm that helps a municipality own a project. I think we're a little bit less sensitive about how we get to that point. So there are cases out there where a municipality put out an RFP for a solar development firm to build a project on, say, a municipally owned site. And very often when that happened, there was a request in the RFP to identify prices at which the municipality could buy the solar farm from the developer or the third-party owner. And the reason for that was maybe the municipality wanted to own the project, but couldn't get there from a financing perspective because of how the investment tax credits worked. So, maybe there was a case where a developer owned the project for the requisite number of years, benefited from the tax credits, and now it's a more straightforward transaction based on kind of the value of the future cash flow off the project. Um, Point being, there are existing projects out there that are built that may have an opportunity for the municipality to buy the project as it exists from the group that developed it or owns it now. So that's one option that we were examining. Another is, there's a lot of turmoil in the market right now. You start a project for development, maybe it takes, I don't know, put a number on it, 1 year to 3 years to develop and come online. During that time, things like interest rates change a lot, things like federal policy change a lot. There are ways to sort of stabilize that or lock in or grandfather certain policies. But for the most part, there's right now a lot of change in the market. And so, you might develop your project with an understanding of one set of policies, the policies change, and now you might not be sure what to do with that project, or it might not be as high as a priority. So we think there might be an opportunity to take sort of like take a shot at acquiring some of those projects so that we're not starting fresh. We're starting maybe halfway through the development process and making the sort of shortening the development process, if you will. And then, the third bucket would just be, hey, let's start from square one. There's a site. Let's start developing it.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And I ducked out at the perfect time. My internet failed, which has been doing today, but I'm glad I'm back. So, Mike, if you don't mind, as I'm talking, I can't pull up the slides, but so beyond what Mike said, I mean, I think because all of you are located in local communities, if you think that your municipality has a contract, and is hosting a large solar site, it's worth exploring. We'd love to talk to you about it. I know from being on the town board that often you approve these contracts and then they get filed and you forget that you have an option to buy the project, or if you know of a stalled project, or if you know of a site, we'll talk about how you can engage with MSP and we can support exploring the moving forward in your community. So, Mike, sorry, I dropped out. Did you talk about just the de-risking the pre-development process?
No. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So the only other thing we mentioned is a challenge for municipalities that private solar developers take on as risk is that that there is risk in trying to identify a site that's going to be a successful solar site, and we're going to focus on kind of how you do that in a few moments. But it can involve having to pay engineers. You have a site for solar. It can involve, having an engineering site plan layout of a proposed solar system, and it will involve applying for interconnection to your utility, which basically tells you if a solar system could be connected to the grid and how much the cost is going to be. And often that cost can make a project die. And so a municipality, as we all know, doesn't have money lying around to put into investigating a site that may end up be a failed site. And so MSP does that pre-development work, as we'll talk about, at no cost to the municipality through raising grant funds, because our effort is trying to get to viable, buildable sites as quickly as possible. So I think I don't know if we have slides, but if we don't, we can just talk through them as we go, because I'm on a phone, so I can't see them. I think AJ may be able to. I saw a text from AJ. He may be able to share screen with slides, Mike. If you haven't, I just can't tell.
You could pass one of us as well. Okay, great.
Okay. All right, cool. AJ, thanks so much. So we're just going to go into the case studies and then we'll kind of talk about how if a municipality on this call or someone in the community on this call is interested in exploring more what that looks like. So we just wanted to kind of present 3 case studies of municipally owned solar in New York State because they tell a little bit about the opportunity we're discussing and some of the challenges that MSP is set up to address. So, we've just kind of called around to different municipalities we've been in contact with. So case number one, if you look at the village of Croton Harmon, New York, they a few years ago built a fairly small, less than 50 kilowatt system on their firehouse garage, on their firehouse rooftop. They did it just with New York State grants, as many municipalities do. In talking to them, this is one challenge. They just found that when they released an RFP, when developers found out that the system would be owned by the municipality, they weren't interested in owning the system. So I think that is one challenge, which is to find developers that want to do the work of building a system where the benefits are going to go to the municipality. It's going to be owned by the municipality. And then I think what's an interesting part of the Croton Harmon case study is if anybody's driven by the Croton Harmon Metro North Station, you'll see massive solar canopies, which are really awesome. All of those solar canopies are on municipally owned land that the village of Croton Harmon owned. And so recently that solar canopy was completed. It's a 10-acre 4.2 megawatt solar system. That's a lot of energy, and it has a 3.2 megawatt battery storage project. It's on municipally owned land, but it's developed and owned by Sol Systems, just a private developer. And when we talked to the Climate Smart Community Coordinator, and you would be surprised how many Climate Smart Community Coordinators are kind of driving this sort of work forward. He estimated that the municipal lease payment from Sol Systems accounted for less than 20% of the annual revenue generated by the sale of the electricity from the project, leaving 80% of the revenue on the developer side. Of course, that has to go and pay for the cost of the project and the operating costs, but it's just to say that, there is a lot, when a municipality owns the system, they also own control of the revenue generated by the system. Case study number two, if anybody's ever talked to Julie Noble, who does such an amazing job kind of driving forward sustainability initiatives in Kingston, City of Kingston has built a 50 kilowatt rooftop solar system on their neighborhood center, and they're currently building 2 more municipally owned rooftop systems. To the question earlier, they, as a municipality, are owning and operating and maintaining their own solar systems. But they also demonstrated kind of a path forward that MSP kind of would like to utilize, which is after they built those municipally owned systems and they saw the benefit of owning them themselves, they recently approved a bond to finance, I think, an $800,000 bond to finance further municipally owned projects as part of their capital projects budget. So they're utilizing that access to bonding low interest money to build municipally owned systems. And then case number 3, and I learned about this case because in the project that the Ecological Citizens Project is involved with in Cohoes in Peekskill, we are helping Peekskill build a floating solar array on their municipal water reservoir. Who's really led the way in that is the city of Cohoes, New York. They have just, I think, put the first 1,000 panels on the water reservoir, but it's an $8 million, 3.2 megawatt municipally owned project that will eliminate more than $600,000 in municipal electric costs, like Mike said, by being behind the meter. So it's a massive municipal benefit. And they also plan to sell any surplus energy onto the grid, creating a new municipal revenue stream. And I think that's kind of part of the real interest in municipally owned solar, is the idea of reaping those benefits and directing them to community needs that are important to the community. The caveat there, of course, is that it just got harder with the loss of the 30% subsidy, of course. So we always have to put our reality glasses on. And at the same time, when you're building a project that big, you need access to funding. Co-Host was able to secure a congressional community project funding grant of $3 million. They used the ITC. So finding the financing is really important. We probably won't talk about it much because it's in early stages, but the MSP is trying to put together financing streams to support municipal ownership. We're in conversations with the New York State Green Bank and how we can kind of aggregate projects to access their funding. And are talking to a partner global development initiative about building a fund that would support municipally owned solar. So I will stop there, just see if there's any questions or if anybody, if Mike wants to chime in or anything before we kind of get into some examples of the work we're doing now and how we're going to do it. Are we all good? Okay, so we'll keep going, but I would like to say that like these 3 case studies show us the real opportunity here, and they show us that this is no longer just like municipal ownership is no longer a thought in a white paper or an idea you hear at a conference. Municipal leaders are moving ahead with these projects across all of the ideological spectrums because it's in their job description to save money for their residents, to cut municipal costs where they can, and to make climate progress. So this is how we'll talk a little bit now about into the nitty gritty, the practical nature of how Municipal Solar Partners works with municipalities. And so we kind of think of our work in 2 phases of work. And right now, what we're doing is we're putting together our first cohort of municipalities that will have access to these phase 1 supports at no cost because we have grant funding. And so we actually still have a few places left in that cohort that we're looking to fill, but primarily by finding communities that have productive, viable sites, which we'll talk about. So really phase 1 of the work is talking to municipalities and finding partner municipalities that are committed to exploring municipal ownership of new projects that may have, like Mike discussed, existing solar lease contracts that they want to explore purchasing. And we would help them do the analysis to see if it makes sense to purchase it in these market conditions, or their community may be home to a project that has stalled because let's say the ITC is going to go away, or let's say the rate of return is not high enough to continue the project. Then MSP would look at all 3 of those avenues. For new projects, we're currently working with municipalities to find what sites they're interested in exploring for solar development and assessing the site feasibility of those sites. And then for projects that MSP thinks are feasible and would make good projects, we then go into conducting preliminary and funding preliminary engineering studies, which would be early electrical engineering diagrams and site plans, which are necessary to submit a utility interconnection application, which will tell you the viability of connecting the project to the grid and the cost. And so, like I said, we're very much, we've worked on projects where interconnection study comes a year or 2 after you start the work. And we're trying to use grant funding to fast forward that process so a community can know if they have a viable site or not as quickly as possible, because we all know we do not have time on our side. Phase 2, which we won't go too deeply into, is after a municipality has found a viable site and moves forward with it, they would have to issue an RFP and go through a municipal competitive procurement process. MSP would apply to that RFP. There's no guarantee that we would win it against other conventional developer proposals, but we believe we will because of the flow of community benefits through a municipally owned approach, but it's a risk that we're taking. And if we were selected for the RFP, we would do all the other things that a traditional solar developer does. We provide economic analysis of the benefits of the project. We would help the municipality go through and complete the permitting process. We would help hire and manage the EPC or the engineering firm that would construct the project. And we would secure and structure the project financing for the project. And then we would identify third-party operations and maintenance management firms and subscriber management firms, which we can talk about. These are managing, if you do a community solar program where the municipality elects to sell the electricity produced onto the grid and subscribe residents into that community solar program. And they can decide, the municipality could say they want to just have, let's say, their municipality's residents getting electricity bill savings from their project. Oftentimes you would hire a third-party subscription management firm to help subscribe those customers and maintain them over time, which would be part of the project. I'll stop there because I thought I saw flash some questions and didn't know if we should address them.
Yeah, Jason, I think someone is wondering, how do you guys at MSP get paid?
Such a good question. The details. So it's a really important question. So in phase one work, which is kind of assessing sites, there's no cost to the municipality, and we're just doing those. Those costs are supported by philanthropic grants that we've raised. If we are selected for an RFP and do the development work on it, and the project is successfully built and in operation, like all other solar developers, we would charge a developer fee as part of the project financing. But the difference is, as a nonprofit who has a commitment and restriction to our work being in the public benefit, that development fee would be restricted to just covering our operating costs and would not go above that. And so there's a slide on it later, but the short story is that to get off the ground and prove the model, we're being supported by grants from foundations. In the long run, we hope we're doing enough projects where development fees will help sustain the operating costs of the nonprofit development firm. Good question. Were there any others, Vanessa, or should we go on?
I think you can go on.
Okay. So let's now get into some examples of phase one work. And this is the work that we're currently doing with municipalities that we are trying to bring into our first cohort of 3 to 5 municipalities. And so one of the first steps we would take is just to get the support of the town board or village body and them to signal their commitment to exploring municipally owned solar at a specific site. And so this is just an example of a recent resolution passed by the town of Rhinebeck, which is kind of signaling their support for working with Municipal Solar Partners. It's attached to a letter of interest, which details the work we will do for the municipality in phase one. And it was passed recently with full board support. And I got to give a shout out to Vanessa as well for helping kind of connect us and think about how to connect us there. Another example of what we do once we're engaged with a municipality, and again, this is at no cost, but we are really trying to find viable sites. First things we'll look at is interconnection of a proposed site to the grid. Mike, I'm sick of hearing myself talk. Do you want to talk a little bit just about kind of what you're looking for when you're looking at interconnection?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think one thing to key on here is that New York's utilities and a couple other states' utilities really do a good job of providing information for those interested in solar farms siting to work from. And so I think all the utilities in New York State have what's called a hosting capacity map. And so they issue a map on their website that you sign into or can access. And you can click around your town, and it's sort of a map of all of the grid in your town, and it's color coded based on, I think, voltage of different wires and the capacity remaining on each wire, I think is how most of them work. So like for Central Hudson, there's a local hosting capacity map. And so if you're in the town of Rhinebeck, you can, sort of surf through there and find your site and look for three-phase wires that are near your site. And for most solar projects of a certain capacity, you'll need to connect to three-phase wires. I'm not an engineer. I barely even understand what that means. But from a layman's perspective, when you drive around and look at utility poles, if there's three electric wires across the top, that's a three-phase circuit. And so the voltage matters, the capacity certainly matters, but a lot of that data is made public. So that's what we're looking at as an example of here. The feeder is, I think, basically a name for a circuit between two substations. It'll give you the voltage. It'll say the hosting capacity, and that's really how much power from a generator could go on that line. And it'll give you other data like how much DG is distributed generation. So like in that middle row, roughly speaking, it says feeder DG connected in megawatts. So on that line that Jason had clicked as an example, there's like a quarter of a megawatt already online, and that's probably, a bunch of rooftop systems aggregating up to a quarter megawatt. So on this one, it looks like a 4.8 kilovolt line. There's a capacity left over of about 4 megawatts. So that's, helpful to know that the data is not 100% perfect because, nothing is. The utilities are doing their best here to provide the information. But it's a good starting point, as you sort of rummage through sites online and trying to figure out where might a viable site be. If you can be in good proximity to a line with available capacity, that's a great starting point. Good proximity is a subjective matter. So, a lot of the great sites where, there's open land right near a substation that has capacity, those are probably taken already by a solar farm. So we're starting to sort of see the second tier interest coming online where maybe it's like a half mile to a mile to a viable line and you got to build to get there or, upgrade to get there. That's probably okay, maybe not okay, but worth checking. If you're like 5 miles from a viable line, you probably don't have a project that's viable economically. So it's hard to sort of create rules of thumb here, but generally you want to be kind of within a mile or two of a viable line is a good place to start investigating a project.
Thanks, Mike. And as Mike mentioned, in that example he just walked through, that's a great outcome. So far as we're checking viability of a site, that one passes because there's, like Mike said, with a grain of salt, but 4 megawatts, a lot of capacity on that line. So going on to the next example, and just be quick because it's so simple, we'll also do a very simple, and almost anybody can do this, desktop analysis of how much, what the estimated production of a proposed system on a site could be. If the project moves forward and MSP is paying for early engineering and site plan, it will provide more detail around the viability of that. So that's kind of looking at the productivity of a system. If we go to the next, where we're looking at now, another thing we'll do to assess a site is just look at local zoning and regulations related to a site. So is that site zoned for solar? Are there important natural resources that are close to the site or part of the site that should be taken into consideration? Would permitting be allowed? And that also includes an analysis of the existing municipal resolutions. Does a municipality have a restriction on the size of a solar project? Does a municipality have a restriction on allowing for community solar or commercial systems? How would the municipality get around and plan to permit a project through those steps as a partner to try to bring that project online? And of course, just noting, as a nonprofit developer who is environmentally focused and conscious, we obviously pay a lot of attention to building solar in ways that don't damage natural resources. And then the last is, as we're talking to municipalities, especially in this post-ITC environment, this is just a picture of the Croton Harmon solar canopies built on village-owned land, but not owned by them. You'll see in the bottom right of the picture the battery storage components of the system. Mike, I don't know if you want to briefly mention, this is something we're still exploring and trying to partner with experts on, but just, quickly mentioning why should municipalities consider battery storage on their site if possible?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, thematically, the cost of batteries and energy storage has come way down in, call it 5 years, and the prevalence of battery systems, you know, becoming operational has gone way up in that same period. And so, sort of as we were talking earlier about sort of the theme of or the power of aggregation, right? Like this is another place where it applies. You have all these little distributed generation scale batteries and solar farms scattered throughout New York State or whatever region you want to pick. New York has been really successful at it, though. So it's a good one to pick on. And, together those systems add up to a significant scale. And so there are new ways to say, okay, we have a battery here doing one purpose. Maybe it's just, peak shifting. So solar might generate most of its power from, I don't know, make it up noon to 4 p.m. most afternoons, but most of the load occurs from like 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. So batteries can be installed to sort of catch some of that generation that's not meeting peak demand and send it out to the grid later in the day to match peak demand, with the benefit being that, the more peak resources we have that are clean, the fewer peak resources we have to run that are sort of dirty or sort of traditionally fired. So there's an environmental benefit there. There's a number of sort of nerdy and economic benefits to doing that too, and sort of providing services to the wholesale or New York system operator grid from smaller distributed generation batteries is becoming a kind of a new market opportunity as well. And then there's kind of a resiliency argument, and that depends on where the project, whether that be a solar farm or a battery, are located in relation to critical loads. But you could imagine certainly like a town hall or like a community library or something like that that has a battery being able to stay on for a certain number of hours through, a power outage or something like that. So there's certainly environmental benefits to batteries. There's certainly economic, and then there's resilience case as well, depending on sort of where it stands and where it's located.
Thanks, Mike. So we just have one more, and AJ, I'm gonna ask your assistance. We have one more slide, but I'm gonna ask because it's kind of, I think I buried the lead. I skipped a slide that I wanted to focus on, and it's slide 10. AJ, if you don't mind, it's the maximizing community benefits slide before we kind of go back and end and see if there's any questions. So this is just an example of the project we're working on with the city of Peekskill as the Ecological Citizens Project. And I didn't want to bury the lead because one of the key reasons that Municipal Solar Partners is formed is because the belief that if a municipality owns the solar system, that the local community is going to get more of the benefits from that system. And those benefits can look different and they can be defined by the community. And so what we're often talking about, and I'll walk through this, is when you think about benefits, like we've said, like Mike said, it could be a behind the meter project, and the benefit is just offsetting all of the municipality's electric bills. So they now have freed up money to spend otherwise in the community. That's a benefit. Or if they decide to have a commercial system where the municipality owns it and they sell the electricity into the grid, perhaps through a community solar subscription program, they can also define the benefits. And so this is the community benefits model that the city of Peekskill and the ECP and our partner Working Power in that project helped shape. And so on the left-hand side, you'll see, kind of a simplified view, but under a conventional development model, those community benefits may be a lease payment to the municipality if it's their land. It may be a mandatory 10% electricity bill savings to households through a community solar program, and then you get your climate benefits. And those would often be seen as the community benefits. And I don't know if Mike will will mind me for this. I would often say that the community benefits by conventional developers are often just seen as a cost of doing business. Maybe that's too harsh, but it is part of a cost of doing business, or maybe it's secondary. Whereas if it's municipally owned and the municipality decides where the revenues flow from the project, in Peekskill, for example, the benefit flow would be a community solar program that reserves half of the electricity produced for low and moderate income households in the city of Peekskill to receive a doubled 20% electricity bill savings. And so, for example, that's half of that's going to go to public housing residents. The ECP is involved in that project because there's also going to be the creation of a food sovereignty fund from the solar revenues to support the public food garden that the ECP helped create in the city of Peekskill that donates free food to community members. But then also making a real effort to include solar workforce training, and then also using grant funds to pay local CBOs to help subscribe and refer low-income households into the program. So it's just to say that you can focus on maximize community benefits. But again, I will be realistic. In the Peekskill project, the loss of the ITC has really changed our thinking about how much community benefits are available. And we got a incredibly high interconnection study back from Con Edison, which is also impacting that community benefit flow. But I know, Vanessa Page, that part of these series of speakers are kind of thinking about how to generate revenues to support communities and environmental work. We believe municipal solar can do that, but we also know that the change in the ITC and the resulting market is going to probably reduce the size of those benefits. So we will just end so we can leave time for any questions, because I saw someone ask how to get involved. Just the forming MSP's first municipal partner cohort. So we were launched only a few months ago. We are forming our first municipal partner cohort of 3 to 5 municipalities. We still have a few spaces left. Municipal partners. So if your municipality is going to be interested in joining the municipal partner cohort, they would have had to want to explore municipal ownership. So we would talk to them about what that means. They would identify a potential site and we would assess it. They would identify a project lead. And if MSP assessed that site as being productive and viable, we would work with that municipality and they would join the cohort and they would receive those phase 1 activities we discussed at no cost, such as for sites that look like productive sites, MSP using grant funds to hire an engineer to do things like that early electrical study, that site plan, and the interconnection application fee to move interconnection forward. And part of our hope is that some of you may be in communities that you think could be a MSP municipal partner cohort member potentially. And so we would be happy. You have both of our contact information. If you want to kind of talk more about what the first step would be to thinking about pushing for this in your community. But we do believe it's a worthwhile thing, especially as we're in this time where climate crisis meets changing federal policy and finding a viable local path forward to build solar that really gives communities most of the benefit. So thank you for giving us this time. We always, I guess we've got a little bit of time left, but we would love to open it up to any questions or any discussion that this spurred in your mind related to things you're interested in. We would love to learn more about, because I know many of you are kind of active leaders in your community. So we would love to hear.
Thank you so much, Jason and Mike and AJ. And I would love, to especially preference any questions from the Funding Futures cohort members who are here. But I just had one quick follow-up question, which is you mentioned the Rhinebeck example, the town landfill that is capped as being, a piece of land that's of interest. Are there other types of like potentially productive sites that you would suggest that folks kind of take a look at on the map?
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, go
I
ahead, Mike.
think, I had this experience working for a developer that only did brownfield and landfill sites, and I was really keen on that targeting. I don't personally support sort of conversion of forest or farmland for solar. So I tend to gravitate towards kind of horrendous sites like capped landfills, um, other types of brownfields or polluted sites, parking lots with canopies, or you know, a highway department garage is often a great roof, right? Just an enormous roof structure with doing nothing else, right? So that's a great candidate as well. I think, we kind of think, as you can tell from our presentation probably and sort of the way we talk about this, we believe this stuff to be true and we're working on proving it, right? So we're in the early stages of this. And I think, we wanted to sort of target 5 megawatt sites um, because, big projects, big problems, small projects, big problems, so you kind of want to choose your sites wisely. But I do think that there's an argument to be made for kind of, if we had 15 highway garages come across our desk, we would jump on that. That'd be really great. That'd be a great project to work on.
And when you
Um,
say 5 megawatt, like what is
yeah,
that in
good
terms of,
question.
like acreage or something?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
as
Yeah,
folks.
so like 5 megawatts is probably like somewhere on the order of 20 to 30 acres of land.
Okay.
So that's a big project. 1 megawatt, I kind of use a rule of thumb as like 1 megawatt equals roughly 5 to 7 acres or something like that. Um, but if you were in the highway garage, realm of project sizes, maybe you're talking 250 kilowatts per project, which is a quarter megawatt. Um, I'm not an expert in highway garages, so I don't know how big they normally are, but I think like a 200 kilowatt project is sort of straight down the fairway for a lot of municipal structures.
Mm-hmm. And I would add there, because maybe we didn't mention it, Vanessa, to your point that part of the reason we're doing this cohort approach is that if we find 3 to 5 municipalities and they have smaller scale projects of around a megawatt per municipality, then we think that aggregating those together into a 3 to 5 megawatt project as a portfolio when the municipalities are put together can help access financing through things like the New York State Green Bank that have income thresholds, project cost thresholds, and can help realize cost savings when you go out and bid for example, the solar panels for all 5 of the projects together.
Yeah.
So, so we're willing to pool smaller projects so they aggregate.
So it's almost like taking the theory behind CCA or community choice aggregation, where you have bulk purchasing power and applying it towards the build.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's
Any,
kind of a popular thing. Like there's been solarized campaigns in
yeah,
New York, that's sort of the same idea.
yeah.
Oh, and I'm just going to make one more point. If anybody out there wants to start noodling around and looking for municipal sites, every county usually has a parcel access tracker, Dutchess County parcel access, and you can go in and just type in ownership name, the town, and it'll allow you to see different parcels, and you can kind of bring that filter to them. And again, like I mentioned, Scenic Hudson's How to Solar, which is a free tool, also really helps identify municipal sites, and they're fun to look at. Sorry, Vanessa, go ahead.
Any questions from the group?
So I guess it would have to be municipally owned land. Like you're not going to have some arrangement where you have the perfect spot where everybody wants to put the solar farm, but it might not be owned by the town.
I think we could look at that. I don't think the site actually, I think sort of the smallest component of the benefit from a solar farm is the land lease,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So like there's still a lot to be gained for the municipality slash public in general, even if it's on a privately owned site. I mean, I think we'd like to initially screen for municipally owned land. It makes life easier in the
Right.
scheme of things of project development. But if it's not, I wouldn't rule it out if you know of a good site.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Any other learnings or tips you have when it comes particularly to, we work with a lot of small Hudson Valley towns. These are small municipalities. They don't have a lot of staff or extra resources. What's your approach with like working with that scale?
We'd love to do the legwork. I mean, I'm aware of like the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level has sort of a solar screening service for your capped landfill. And you can sort of call them up and ask for an assessment, and they'll give you sort of like a 5-page write-up of what they think of your site. Um, I've been present for a number of cases where a municipality has done that, and then 5 years later they put out the RFP, and it's just because no one has time to do the work, right? And so we would love to sort of have the chance to do the work on behalf of, and I think that that's kind of a practice that we need to figure out with that first cohort is what does that look like, and what's the best use of the municipality's volunteer time and versus ours, and sort of what things can we do on behalf of, and what things do we need to do sort of in partnership. Those are open questions that we need to sort of explore with our first cohort. But the idea is we do the legwork as related to solar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If there are no questions, I would like to ask just one question myself. If there's no questions, Vanessa.
I did have a question if you got a sec about
please.
So I'm kind of creeping on this call, but I'm headed to Cornell to study agrivoltaics in a few weeks. So I was pretty interested to hear what you guys have to say. And I did hear you say for a second, Michael, that generally you're maybe not interested in why involve farming and solar if they don't need to be. And I guess what I'm hoping to learn is if it's going to happen, it's good to know about what's going on. But I wondered if you've had encountered any projects or municipalities kind of in cooperation with academic institutions or food hubs or agricultural centers, places where something like this, even though it could possibly be integrated with farming, or if this could help any with like these second tier sites, like places that people are using agriculturally, but maybe don't want to give up. And maybe that could create a partnership. And also the idea that like, could this in the flip flop in the reverse, if there are a lot of solar installations or arrays that are on brown fields or unwanted land, could this in reverse actually, if the arrays are built in a way where growing things could actually improve the land, maybe there's something to be of interest there?
Mm-hmm. I can definitely just say a quick thing to that, Jane, and it's super cool that you're going to study that. So I'm biased because I farm as well, but one thing I'd say is that I think Mike's point is more that, American farmland is at risk to complete conversion, kind of solar projects that utilize the entire land space, kind of displacing agricultural activities. And I think that's something that it scares a lot of people, displacing food production needs for energy production. And Mike, I won't let you go on the ethanol rant, but Jane, I point you to, I'm on the American Farmland Trust, the New York Advisory Board, and we talk about agrivoltaics a lot. And American Farmland Trust is in support, as is the national branch, for implementing and supporting agrivoltaics. And I've kind of been pushing the idea of community-owned agrivoltaics or farmer-owned agrivoltaics. So the farmer is actually getting more of that revenue stream from the projects. But I'd be happy to put you in touch with them because they definitely know of New York State-based agrivoltaic trials that would probably be of interest to you. So if you want to email me, I'll forward them to you so you can keep doing that good work.
Yeah, I think that's a worthwhile point of clarification. I mean, I think I have no bones to pick with agrivoltaics. I think it's a great dual use of land. I think it just at a 30,000 foot level, if you're looking at a map and where to plunk a solar farm, I'm not in favor of giving up farmland or forest land to put a solar farm. I'd rather direct solar to, crummy pieces of land already. But I think agrivoltaics is a wonderful dual use concept. I think also like it's kind of interesting. Solar's like this cool technology that, in terms of improving over years, what's really happening is power density is increasing. So like one panel, think of it like a sheet of plywood, 4 by 8, roughly speaking. 10 years ago was like 200 watts, and now they're 700 and 800 watts. And in a lot of cases, they put PV cells on both sides of the panel, so they're bifacial, and then they're a little bit transparent. So the sun comes down, hits the first face, penetrates, reflects off the ground, and hits the second face. And so in sort of that emerging technology of panel improvement, you're also seeing how that helps sort of grow stuff underneath the panels. And one of the things we learned when we would own a couple sites is the grass grows better underneath the panels, which is frustrating to us because we have to pay to cut it. And there's sort of like a sort of biome effect under the panels. Maybe it's like a mini greenhouse effect. I don't know. I'm not really studied up on it, but maybe it's shade, maybe it's just sort of capturing some moisture in there a little bit more, but you can see it when you walk a site. It's like the grass under the panels and the grass between the rows. So I think that there's a big role to play for sort of agrivoltaics and thinking through in clever ways how to combine those two uses. And also, maybe I'm rambling here. I promise not to go into the ethanol stuff, but you have these arrays now that track the sun, right? So we used to orient the row east to west with south-facing fixed tilt panels. And now, more common, you'll see the rows oriented north-south with the tracker following from east to west over the course of the day. And the point of bringing that up that's neat is, especially with agrivoltaics, is I don't know, Jason, you might have to comment on the farming, but when a farming activity needs to occur, you can sort of store the panels and make them the thinnest that they can be, drive your tractor between the row and then get them going again, right? So it's kind of a neat way to sort of promote the flexibility of a site.
Mm. So I totally agree. I know we're at time. So I was just going to point out the chat. Michael Helm, before handing it back to you, also agreed with you, Mike, about ethanol.
This is my thing.
And so Michael Helm, I'm sure we would support the effort to try to convert ethanol over to solar fields and farmland, especially if it's agrivoltaic and especially if it's set up in a way where the revenue stream goes back to the farmer in more of a way. At least it's for me. But I know we're at time, and you all have been very generous in giving us time. So we thank you, and we thank Paige and Vanessa for inviting us. And we appreciate all the work PCA is doing and Funding Futures cohort is going to do as well. So thank you very much. And please reach out to us if you think you may have a municipality that wants to learn more.
Thank you so much. And we've recorded this session, so we'll have this up on the PCA YouTube if anybody needs to reference it. Thank you so much, you guys, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.